All right, welcome everyone. I'm glad to see you here. Courtney and I were guessing that whoever showed up to this webinar probably is also a political junkie or just like, I need some comfort. Let me go somewhere people understand me. So welcome. Courtney and I have a really long history together. I'm guessing 15, 20 years. And, she's given me a lot of really important lessons over the years. One of the most important being that you really don't need to go to a manicurist, just buy the Lee press-on nails. And I think that really kind of wraps up Courtney for me. Like she, we can get the same look, spend a lot less money, and they work. So anyway, that's my kind of girl right there. One of the things I want to share with you guys about Courtney, because I think it's really cool, is that Courtney, in addition to being a professional peer-to-peer fundraiser and now a chief development officer, is also a national class ballroom dancer. Like, who saw that coming, right? So it's really fun. She didn't talk about it much, but I just love it. Like, we follow her when she goes to compete. We think it's great. The other thing you should know is that our staff meeting got canceled today. So all of my staff is on the call, which almost never happens. So I anticipate great harassment during the call in the chat. Thanks for that, guys. All right, so from there, one of the things that my husband and I, Otis Fulton, we are political junkies. And we have often, like for years, we've looked at politics and said, that is peer-to-peer and they don't use the same words, or they need to take in some of our best practices. So Courtney is also deeply involved in politics on a personal level and a professional peer-to-peer fundraiser. So we thought this could be a good conversation. And when I talked with her, she made it clear that there were some things they're doing that we should adopt as well. So with that, I'm going to jump in. Courtney, say hi, and then tell us about your experience in the Georgia runoff. Let's go. And I'm going to assume the role of interrupting and questioning as we go through this. And I'll be interacting heavily in the chat as well.
Fantastic. Hi, everybody. I'm Courtney. First of all, they're not Lee press-ons. Those are old. They're called KISS press-ons. You can get them at Target, and they're beautiful. Right. Number two is if you occasionally hear it, I am a webinar cliche because I have 500 pounds worth of dogs behind me. So occasionally they see a squirrel. So the thing that we've seen is I live here in Atlanta, and I've been a fundraiser for a very long time. And the one place I'll probably either diverge or be preaching to the choir is I don't really believe that I'm a peer-to-peer fundraiser because I believe all fundraising is peer-to-peer. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that we saw was that here in Georgia, we had a very, very important runoff election. Some of you might have heard about it. And so what did we see when we were there in this runoff? It was 8 weeks long, and from the general election to the runoff. And during that 8 weeks, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a snapshot about what happened to me as a voter. So as a voter, in 8 weeks, I received 573 mass emails. So for those of you who are wondering if you're emailing too much, apparently it's not possible. 48 pieces of direct mail. And I will say this is not all from campaigns. There were many, many nonprofit and nonpartisan organizations, both here in Georgia and outside Georgia. I also received 87 personal emails from a person. I got 63 personal phone calls, 141 personal text messages, which I'm sure we're using. Both sides of the aisle had platforms that they were using, but I spoke to Susan and Howard and Barry and Kate from all over the country. I received 14 handwritten postcards. In fact, as of the Christmas holiday, I had more Georgia runoff postcards than I did Christmas or holiday cards. I received 75 invitations to virtual rallies. I sat in on virtual rallies with people I never would have been able to see in person, and actually got to hear people speak on a variety of topics, which, by the way, I never would have attended if they had been person because it was really easy for me to do it in my PJs. I got 82 separate invitations to volunteer, I got 6 calls that were asking me about my opinions for polling, a couple that were clearly nonpartisan, a couple that were clearly internal polls. It was very interesting to see the difference between them. And I got 4 actual knocks on the door. One thing that was a little bit unusual in the runoff is there was not a lot of ground game in Georgia in terms of in-person knocks on the door before the general. But in the runoff, people had sort of figured out how to do that safely. So this is what happened just to one voter in 8 weeks.
Are you
Yes.
special in any way? I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah. So one of the things that, of course, our political friends have that we don't is that they truly utilize big data in a way that we often talk about, but they actually operate on. My political leanings are fairly clear in terms of my donation history and the fact that I always vote. What was interesting is that it was pretty obvious based on my voter history that I am a voter, but I still received a lot of reminders to vote. However, I am a suburban white woman who lived in a county that was ended up being blue, but has not been blue for very long. So if you were to ever watch your, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC wall, those sort of suburban Georgia voters were ones that they talked about a lot. I apparently am one of them. That is my guess of why I received a fair amount of this, and the fact that I had been active in the past. So all of these things were related to either voting, getting out the vote, other people voting.
Okay. So
not everyone received this.
Imagine a world in which we in nonprofit use big data in the same way. What would be the analogy in peer-to-peer fundraising to a Courtney?
Sure. So I would say that I am probably if you're thinking about an event, I'm probably a mid-level team captain. Like I come back every year. I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fundraiser. I'm not the biggest single donor. My team's maybe not so big. What we'll talk about is how their engagement strategies actually engaged people to get involved in ways that they never had before. And that certainly was applicable to me.
So, you were with, I forget the forced organization, the survival, tell me the name.
What, when I started,
Yeah.
when I started with Young Survival Coalition, which is a national breast cancer nonprofit. Yes.
Okay. Then you were at Komen and now you're at Piedmont Park. How close, given the barriers that we have with data and with deployment, could you get to something like this as a professional fundraiser? Like what?
I think there's a lot of ways that if you understand and you talk to your participants and people, you don't have to use really fancy technology. And the other thing is that what we learned here is you don't want to let perfect be the enemy of good. I certainly got, reached out to by multiple people, even after I had voted, asking me to vote, no harm, no foul. I think sometimes the other thing that you can learn is that we're so afraid to maybe get it wrong, which is almost the opposite of what I would say as a fundraiser, which is like, show me, you know me, make sure it's personalized, like make sure you really understand them. What we can learn from politics is that you can never ask too many times. And worst case scenario is you don't quite get it right. I wouldn't do that with your top tier of donors, but those people in the middle, like a person like me, if they love you, they will overlook the fact that you've sent them 573 mass emails. And by the way, I didn't unsubscribe to a single one.
So when you look at this list, how many were deployed in, would you guess, by the organization itself or the party itself or the candidate themselves versus they recruited a volunteer to do these things to you?
Yeah, so the personal emails, personal phone calls, personal text messages, and handwritten postcards, knocks on the door, those were all from they had engaged someone to reach out to me.
So Chris Eschman, hey Chris, said that she was actually sending postcards from her state to Georgia as a volunteer. So you were both on the giving and the receiving end of this. Tell me, in what scenarios did they ask you to do something that you did something to other people?
Sure. So I received a lot of asks to connect with other people. So the number one thing that people were asking us to do was to text our friends. So it's a really easy ask, and we're going to talk about it in a minute. A couple of very specific tactics, but the number one thing I was asked to do was, can you text 3 friends? Can you text friends and remind them to vote? Can you text them and ask if they're registered? Can you text them and see if they will join you? There was a lot of, oh, you signed up to volunteer. Can you text a friend and ask and send them this link? So, one of the things that I would certainly do is, and you can talk, there's lots of technology and there's lots of vendors, but texting was the number one way that I was communicated to in a way that I responded. I didn't respond to emails. I responded to people's texts every time.
Okay.
Not the ones that were general, but when Sally texted me from Ohio, I always responded.
Well,
again, I'm not everyone, but if you think of me as your, mid-level team captain, text messages was certainly the way to go.
So another one of our guests, Kathy from Colorado, you might have gotten one of her postcards too. So good job, Kathy. All right, keep going.
So this was, and there's actually a few articles and studies about it. This was the largest single grassroots activation of its kind in the history of politics. This 8 weeks in Georgia was the center of the political universe. So this is, as sort of fundraisers, we have to think about, what do we take from this? Because there were a lot of lessons that seemingly throw a little bit about what we think about in terms of traditional peer-to-peer fundraising, and toss that aside. The biggest thing is urgency. So, and I will say, if you do not have urgency, you will not be able to toss some of our traditional ways of thinking aside, because you will have not built out a case statement that is powerful enough for people not to care if you email them 573 times. So this is what we learned. People were fired up. They were fired up on both sides. The fate of the Senate hung in the balance. Depending on who you talk to, they thought that this was, the fate of all democracy. On one side, they also saw it as, what was the Republican legacy? So people were fired up, and the vast majority of people felt powerless. So unless you were in Georgia, there were a lot of people around the country that were watching something they cared about, and they felt like they couldn't do anything because they couldn't vote. So the first thing that I would say is, when you're looking at your peer-to-peer program or just your organizational communication, is, where is your urgency? Political communication is really good at doing this, and probably a little over the top compared to what most nonprofits are doing. So there's maybe a happy medium, but you've really got to look at every communication you're doing and say, if you don't do what we ask, what will happen? And this isn't necessarily a scare tactic, but there is something about, like, if you don't send those postcards, if we don't, regain the Senate, like, depending on which side you were, there were a lot of scenarios that people did not want to see. So one is, create that sense of urgency. And if it's urgent, people will feel compelled to do something, because, oh my gosh, if I don't, become a team captain, what will happen? And so this is something really clear. I worked at in the green space and environmental landscape. Now I'm the Chief Marketing and Development Officer at Piedmont Park Conservancy. And we look at that now too, is it's really easy to just be like, hey, join us. But there's nothing in there that says, and if you don't do it, what happens? And politics is really good at saying, if you don't do it, here's what might happen.
So Courtney, let's try and give an example, because that is a tough one. You know, we don't have an election to work on. We
Mhm.
have the fact that X more people will die or suffer a condition or an experience that we don't want them to experience. So let's give us an example. You know, what is it?
So yeah, so a couple of things are, making sure that you have some sort of timeline. So you can create urgency from a timeline perspective, but you want to make sure that it is impactful to the participant, the donor, whoever. So, help us reach our goal. This is one thing that politics does really well. Like, help us reach our goal. We need 55 more people. We need this much more money, or else, we will, fall behind in our fundraising, and that the other side is going to beat us in fundraising, and that's going to enable them to fundraise more. Now, the one thing again is that doesn't always work if your people are kind of, in the middle, because that sort of flies in the sense of like making it donor centric, right? So making it about the organization and your goal and your mission and like your goal of we've got to get this many people or this much money only works with people who are so bought in that that matters. Otherwise, you've got to make it donor centric and you've got to give urgency that relates to them. So, especially in the pandemic, when I'm sure most of you are sort of giving out messages of like, for example, I worked in the health and human service space at the beginning of the pandemic. Cancer does not stop. And we need your support because we still have, X number of increase in our calls to our helpline, or there are, we have run out of money in our treatment assistance program. What is it that you still need and they need? And if you're able to apply a story and a metric at the same time to create that urgency, that'll help. Okay. But if you're looking at an email and you can read it and go, and if I don't do it, what happens? And you haven't even addressed it even tangentially, you're probably missing an opportunity.
Okay, so we have a wide range of organizations on the call. We've got everyone from Cindy at NMSS, who has engagement scoring installed and can do a lot with that, down to people who probably don't. So if you had no systems that would allow you to engagement score, to engage the people who said that you said are the warriors, they're going to be communicated to one way versus the people in the middle. How would you do that with no systems? If you just took a couple of data points, how would you segment those warriors versus the middle?
I would do it based on some of their behaviors. So if you don't have a lot of, analytics around their, engagement scores or their behavior profiles, I would base it on how they've interacted. So are they a team captain? Are they a top fundraiser? Are they brand new? Brand new people have no historical reference to their experience with you. Especially if you're a health and human service organization, a brand new person is often mission affected. So, getting on the phone with brand new people, especially team captains, those people who have already sort of raised their hand and said, I want to involve others, is where I'd start. I've worked in programs from, a couple 100,000 to, many, many, many millions around the country. And as much as I roll my eyes, people everywhere are still rocking a spreadsheet with their team captains and their top fundraisers and just hitting the phones. And as we see, even in politics, hitting the phones, still really powerful.
All right, we have a few questions. I'm going to save them until we're done with the slide. So jump back into your plan here.
So the next thing is the power of community. So people participate in your events or get involved in your organization, but when they especially get involved in a peer-to-peer event, whether it's virtual or in person, they do it to connect to the cause and to a community. So here's an example of a Facebook group, almost 170,000 people. It was created the day after the general election when it was clear it was going to go into a runoff. It had over 100,000 people from around the country within 24 hours. Now, obviously, not everybody is going to do that. But the question is, how do you create community with each other? So as you're thinking about, especially in this virtual environment, how are you giving participants or fundraisers or donors an opportunity to connect with each other, whether it's a Facebook group, whether it's, virtual happy hours, whatever it is. Now, I will say that depending on who you talk to, a lot of those there's some virtual Zoom fatigue. I say this on a Zoom call now, but creating a way to communicate with each other. There are organizations that would, create groups on WhatsApp, create just text chains of, hey, 7, team captains, I thought you guys might really want to connect with each other because you have a lot in common, and go. The reason that community becomes important is because of things like this. So for example, this is from that group. And when people in Georgia would post something, they got all these thanks from all around the country. So as for those who live in Georgia, for those that were, doing the heavy lifting, this kind of peer praise and peer connection did more than any single phone call ever would. I'll give you an example. I have an 11-year-old son who got sort of involved in this. And, every other day he'd be like, tell me all the places around the country that are watching us, Mom. So creating, look at what you're doing and how do you create an opportunity where your peers, your team captains, your top can encourage each other without you. I know that sounds scary, but like all you've got to do is help create a format. This is also a great volunteer opportunity to help lead some of these forums. And again, it could be Facebook, it could be a chat, it could be an email chain, whatever it is, let them connect with each other, because that will do, again, it's peer-to-peer. That's going to be very powerful, especially during a pandemic where a lot of what people just want to do is connect with each other anyway because they can't. So, just think about how you can help people connect with each other, even if it's not even related to the cause. Again, hi, 4 team captains. We know that you guys all have 3 boys. Man, during this, you guys might want to chat with each other because I'm sure you're going through the same kind of thing. The next thing, and obviously if you're on a turnkey webinar, this is probably not a surprise to you. This is sort of psychology at work here. Recognition means something. So this is the infamous Georgia voter sticker. I might be biased, but I think our I voted stickers are the best because they're cool. Interestingly enough, the I secured my vote is new. That it used to just be the peach, but I secured my vote is something that was happening in some counties, not all. And this was powerful. How many of you, when you voted, took a little picture and posted it on Facebook or posted it on Instagram? I was at a polling station actually volunteering when they ran out of stickers, and you would have thought that, see, even Katrina's face, like they ran out of the stickers and people were so sad. I happened to be giving out different stickers for something else. And I got twice as many people because people just wanted a sticker. They wanted to be able to show it. So think about your recognition program. And I'm not even talking about the, when you raise X, you get the backpack. What are you doing to recognize people? And is it something they can't get anywhere else? And it doesn't have to be a big deal. It doesn't have to be anything that's expensive. But how do you create, and this is where you can ask your participants, your team captains, your fundraisers, like that feeling that people get when they put on the I voted sticker. Ask your people, what would give you that same feeling? What could we do that would give you that same feeling? And the feeling is usually pride, empowered. They feel like they've quote unquote made a difference. But a lot of that is they want to show their pride in that they've done it. And then they want other people to see it. So here's a good example of something that is not quote unquote peer-to-peer related. It also involves stickers. So for example, how many of you guys have boards where some people are super engaged and some people just are not? You know, when you get to the point where you're having an in-person board meeting, I've often done it where, you know, especially when you have new board members, everybody gets a name tag. And I did this when I worked at JDRF, for example. We had little tiny stickers related to all of our peer-to-peer programs, as well as planned giving, you know, major giving, advocacy. And on people's name tags, we actually put their stickers of all the ways that they were involved in the organization. And at a board level, you know, they went to the board meeting and they saw that there were, you know, 10 people that had 8 stickers. And then the people who didn't have any stickers, not to say that it was public shaming, it's the opposite. It's just recognition for those who are amazing. But those are the kinds of things, it doesn't have to just be in your peer-to-peer program. Figure out how you can recognize people, which also can draw attention to it, to those who maybe aren't involved. So speaking about, you know, peer-to-peer, so asking people to volunteer brings them closer to you. So there's me, by the way, also have swag, everybody loves swag. That's me at 6 a.m. I'm not a morning person. While I've done walks and runs all my life, that's pretty much the only time I ever wake up before 6 a.m. Except for this. So I volunteered with an organization that was actually coalition, and we were there just to make sure that everything was cool and nobody had any problem. They had a cool name, Election Defenders. They had cool swag. We are often afraid to ask people to volunteer because we think that we've already asked too much of them. And we'll hear that from some of our key volunteers. Oh, you know, people are already spread too thin. Politics don't care. In politics, we are going to ask you to volunteer and ask you again and continue to ask you. And if you say no, we're going to ask you again in a week. And then if you say, I can't do it right now, we'll ask when you'll be able to. People, and the thing is that when and I will admit that I didn't volunteer at the beginning, but I got, you know, it was year-end giving. I didn't really have a lot of time. But I got a little bit beat down because there were so many texts saying, you know, will you please volunteer? Eventually I was like, all right, I feel like I really should. And what happened after I volunteered once, and then I signed up for 8 other opportunities. And again, not everybody is like me, but stop thinking and guessing people's answer before you ask them. People want to be asked. They want to be asked for their expertise. So again, identify people that can help you with something interesting, or they just want to, especially depending on your mission, they want to be able to do something to have control over an uncontrollable situation. So obviously you have to think about your volunteer opportunities. You have to make them meaningful. But quite honestly, in this, there's a lot of things that you're doing at home. Really, really take a look at what you're doing as an organization, especially if you're small. I will bet you that 1/3 of the things that you are doing could be done by a volunteer. And there are volunteers who would love to do it. You've just got to ask them more. And you've got to be really honest about, like, we need help with X. So understandably, sometimes it's hard to manage. So, and you've got to be able to give options. But think about, like, there were 2 people, Katrina, you said, that did postcards, right? I had a friend in New York who personally did like 500 postcards. What is your organization's postcards? What is something you can give people to do that they can do from home? By the way, they'll spend their own money to do it. You know, organizations weren't providing stamps and postcards to people. They were printing their own and doing their own stamps. So think about, what are your organization's postcards that you could give them to do during this pandemic, and then apply it to what you might do when eventually events are in person.
Okay, I promised them out by 12:30, so let's roll to the end and get the questions on the table. All right.
So make them comfortable. People are providing pizza, food. I passed out hand warmers and Rice Krispie treats and water. Whatever you're asking people to do, make sure they're comfortable doing it. This probably applies more when you're in person, but if you are tiptoeing your way back into, in-person things, what are the things that will make people feel comfortable with that? Is it having, temperature checks? Is it having PPE available? Is it making sure that things are already pre-wrapped, pre-done? Think about your volunteer experience. I've been at events where volunteers check in and there is no coffee, no breakfast. Figure out how to make people comfortable. Social media and sharing is key. So think about everything you're doing. This is not just peer-to-peer, but also any other sort of fundraising that you're doing for your organization. Work on a toolkit for your participants. Make sure that you are telling them how and when to share things. So, and think about it not just from your participants, but from your volunteers. So for example, here in Georgia, every organization that reached out to me and to others had some sort of social media toolkit. Never underestimate the power of a great video. Video content is key, and self-sharing mechanisms are key. So, and it doesn't have to be some big fancy thing. You could send an email with a couple of, cute images or things that you made up in Canva and personally just sort of send it through your Outlook to some of your team captains and say, hey, here's an image that you can use, that you can make as your, profile picture, or you can share when you get out and involved. In this day and age, you've got to make it easier for people. And quite honestly, I will say our friends in politics have really stepped up the game. And so therefore people are going to expect it. So it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't, like a couple of organizations would send out a Google Doc. I got a lot of links to Google Docs, which felt a little bit like odd and sort of not secure. But you don't have to wait until you have some fancy thing on your website. You could just send out a couple of pictures, send out a couple of sample emails or sample posts. A lot of the bigger organizations sort of do this to a point, but make sure that you're speaking to it all the time. Because people are going to look to it all the time. So here's an example of something that somebody provided. Again, totally nonpartisan. And it was used as people's Facebook cover page for a while. And that leads into the fact that people inherently are selfish and care about ourselves, and we are performative. So it's not just millennials anymore. I am a firm Gen Xer. And you can see here my overly filtered, super pretty, like beautiful daytime lighting that did not look at all like that, showing off my sticker. So performative activities are not just for millennials and Gen Zs anymore. Everybody wants to do it. Everybody wants a picture of themselves doing it. And I will admit, as a person who occasionally rolls my eyes about things like that, but even in this, I did it. And remember those comments from that community of like, way to go, way to go, way to go. What happened there was every person in Georgia, when they voted in that group, posted a picture of them with their I voted sticker, and then got like kudos and you're a rock star and thank you so much from people all around the country. Especially during this pandemic, unfortunately, digital validation is sort of where people are going. So keep that in mind in your asks. So, every ask is not always an ask to give, and every ask isn't always an ask to fundraise. So you might baby step it in. If you've got those people, those infamous $0 fundraisers, or those low fundraisers, or, the first ask is, hey, can you share this on social media? Hey, can you go out and, take a picture of you in your shirt, and we're all going to post our pictures on our shirts on the same day. prepare your communication for the fact that people are going to want to broadcast themselves almost more than anything. And then the last thing is to take advantage of their great experience for immediate action. So think about your event, whether it's virtual or in person. People come off of it, they feel really great, they're really excited. And then usually what happens is we send them an email the next day telling them how much we've raised, we thank them, and maybe we send them a link to the pictures. Think about, and this is for everything, your gift, your event, how do you take advantage of the fact that people feel awesome about what they did and ask them to do something right then and there? So there's me. And by the way, this is a neighbor who had never been involved in politics before, had never done anything, had seen that I had been starting to volunteer and sent me a text and said, hey, I feel like I should really do something. And every organization that I participated with actually asked me to bring a friend. They said, hey, can you bring a friend to your volunteer activity? Hey, can you bring a friend to your virtual program? So it always asked people to bring someone else. So here we were. This was actually the day when the Georgia stickers were out. And we had a sticker that said, I asked 3 of my friends to vote. And what this is called voter tripling. And what it was is as people came out, you'll notice, I don't know if you could see in the background of that picture, but there's a pretty long line. Every time somebody came out of voting, we at a safe distance, of course, said, hey, thank you so much for voting. Would you be willing to help us and ask 3 of your friends to vote right here and right now? And usually what would happen is those people, because they felt so awesome and they had their Georgia voter sticker on, they were like, yeah, okay. And we'd say, great, can you text them right now? And on average, about a third of people texted people right there in front of us. A third of people said that they would do it like when they got to their car, and often we watched them and they would start to do it. And then a third of people said no thanks or gave us kind of a mean look before we even got to the point of saying, hi, thank you for voting. But think about everything you're asking people to do. And you notice we didn't ask them to donate. And this was actually during early voting when there were still a lot of donations happening. We didn't ask them to give. We asked them to get people involved right then and there. So for example, if you have an event, and I know for some bigger organizations, there's some bureaucracy that make this difficult. But if you have an event, and virtual or otherwise, and you can ask people to sign up for next year's event at the event at the time, go for it. If you have a virtual team kickoff and you can get people to sign up during the kickoff or have something that's happening like right then and there, do it. If you have a major donor happy hour and you can ask them to, text 3 of their friends to say, hey, I'd really love to get you involved in this organization I'm a part of, do it. Immediate action. Again, this is something we are sometimes afraid to do because as nonprofit fundraisers, we sort of think that we should have like a moment of stewardship and thanking and love. Politics doesn't care. And the philosophy is asking them to do something. Remember, asking people to do something brings them closer to you. The asking them to do something establishes them as someone you value, someone you care about, and someone you want to see involved in the future. So think about how you can ask people faster and a little bit harder than you normally would whenever possible, especially when they are already feeling great about what they're doing. A good example is if somebody donates. Number 1 reason people donate is because they're asked. Number 2 reason people donate is because they feel good when they do it. So in your thank you email, are you saying, thank you so much for giving to my organization? If you would, please share this image. I donated and I care. Share this today. Would you consider forwarding this email to 3 of your friends, asking them to give? Think about how you can take advantage of their warm, fuzzy feelings. And
Okay.
that's probably the biggest takeaway, I would say.
All right. So I'm going to pull her off the pulpit, people, but that was great. Go fast, go hard, more is what I'm hearing. Yes. All
Yeah,
right.
don't be afraid. We're a little timid, and there's probably, depending on your organization, they may or may not be ready. I'll give an example of year-end giving. I work for a smaller local organization who had always done sort of a year-end campaign. When I told them that I wanted to do 16 different emails and it involved like 5 emails in the last 3 days, they about had a nervous breakdown. And lo and behold, at the end, they said, you know what? Our unsubscribes weren't any worse, and we raised about 78% more money. So don't be afraid to ask.
Yep, love it. All right, we got a question from Angel. Courtney, you mentioned that you leaned one way politically. Was there one thing you received that made you say either, wow, I'm happy with my choice, or wow, no way I would ever vote that way?
I think, yeah, both ways. So I will say, I didn't get a lot of things from the other side. I got a lot of political commercials. If you were in Georgia, you would have seen in a 4-minute commercial break, about 3 minutes of that would have been back to back to back to back 30-second spots. One of the things that for me made me feel more confident in my choice is actually in one of my polling calls. I was asked a lot of questions and I was like, oh, okay. And by the way, it was a 25-minute phone call. It was long. And I was totally following along for about 15 minutes until it became very clear that the language was designed to divide. And when that language changed was when I was immediately turned off. And in fact, gave them all the answers that they weren't expecting and was not sad about it. But that's just because I'm a little bit feisty. The biggest thing I will tell you that made me feel happier was it was not from the campaigns. It was from the people. I still, like the day that I got my postcard from Cynthia in San Francisco, I should have pulled them down. They're literally hanging with my Christmas cards right now. With a really, like, you could tell what was sort of kind of what was standard language, and then added a note to it. Like, that felt it was very personal. It made me, and again, I'm a fundraiser, so maybe I think more into it than other people, but Cynthia took 10 minutes to do that, and there were different color pens, and there were little drawings, and there was a lot of work involved to it. And it made me feel very special that some other person took enough time and cared enough to make sure that I was activated, that it made me even more engaged. So again, thinking about it, the messages from my peers were more impactful than the messages from the campaign.
How often do you see that happen in nonprofit?
Not nearly enough.
All right. Another question. I heard you say that the outreach was more personalized. Would you say that those types of outreach methods made you feel more like you were making a difference?
Totally. Put a name to it. So even though sometimes I would roll my eyes when I got my 17th, text email of the day from, Sally saying, hey, we want to make sure that you're registered, or have you voted yet? I got asked if I voted a lot. And even if I already had, I sort of rolled my eyes. But again, somebody was taking their time to do it. Now, there are a ton of people that were totally turned off by the amount of attention that Georgians received. I would consider those, if you think about your people, those are probably not your people anyway. So even in if you think about a standard peer-to-peer program, the people that are sort of turned off by your 800,000 ways to outreach are probably not going to be your biggest advocates anyway. The people who might be, so again, the like maybe mid-tier team captain, I got more attention than I've ever received before by so many people. And I felt like I had to do something because other people were.
Got it. You said something earlier. You said all fundraising is peer-to-peer fundraising.
Yep. So think about, what is peer-to-peer fundraising inherently? It's creating relationships with people so their relationships lead to more donors, participants, fundraisers, whatever that might be. All fundraising is peer-to-peer, and at least all fundraising that could be more successful is. So if you think about it, I'm in charge of a capital campaign, and we're going to be, building, part of a park. A capital campaign is a peer-to-peer campaign. We go to our board, we ask our board for things, our board talks to each other. There's a committee that's leading that board effort. The board members then go out, they each get, a group of people that they're going to talk to. If you look at, like how you're doing major donor or even grant fundraising, often, how many of you have had that conversations on a corporate level where you say, man, we've got to get somebody to open the door for us? Your door opener is what makes it peer-to-peer. They're not going to respond to you, they're going to respond to their peer. So in reality, I kind of believe that all the things that make us good peer-to-peer fundraisers are what make us good fundraisers in general. And it's why anybody who does, kind of quote unquote individual fundraising can transition into peer-to-peer pretty easily. Because what you're doing is you're trying not to just do it, yourselves as your small staff. You're creating these people who will go out and activate people for you.
So what the jumping off point here is that in the past, we've looked at peer-to-peer purely that volunteer is going to be a fundraiser, and some very successful programs have taken it one step further and said, I'm going to use peer-to-peer for recruitment to a leadership committee. And what you're describing is a system that is using peer-to-peer recruitment to apply messaging, to deploy messaging. They are the deployment network, to deploy recognition, and to build a community, which we know is intensely engaging to people.
Correct.
What stands in the way for nonprofit? I have the answer that I'm going to call volunteerism is thwarted by controlism on the part of.
There's a little bit of that. I think, because, and I will tell you this as a person who has occasionally inherited some volunteer committees that I would have personally had rather done it all myself than manage that volunteer committee. We all have, right? So one is you have to give up a little bit of control. You have to know that they're going to go like a little bit crazy. You might give them a template and they might do it a little differently. Our marketing and branding folks, it kind of makes them nervous and crazy. The other thing, though, is you have to be able to give them things that are tangible, things to do. It's the equivalent of if any of you are connected to like the disease space or just personally, you ever have anybody who has had a disease, and there's a lot of like, let me know if I can do something. You just let me know if I can do something. Volunteers do that to us a lot of times. Let me know if I can do something. And then what we'll do is we'll kind of like be really vague and ask them to be like a part of a committee. The thing that we can learn here from politics is that what they did is they took a lot more people than we normally would get engaged and asked them to do very small pieces of the pie. They didn't ask everybody to sit on a committee. What they did is they tried to engage their your donors, your participants, then them in and of themselves to become the outreach without making it so formalized. So yeah, you're right. Like for example, when we did this, we were supposed to report on things. And guess what? I forgot to send in my report. So they don't have the data. Guess what? You got to be okay with that. And I know the data part of me, like that makes me super sad. But again, it was the end of the year, and that was actually on New Year's Eve, so I got lost in my car.
I want to draw one more analogy. The political effort that you were engaged in was conducted for the most part virtually, and the culminating event was election day. So
correct.
When you overlay that with our current experience with on the ground events being postponed, canceled, who knows what they're going to be in the future, what comparisons do you draw?
Well, and so I would say yes, it was almost all virtual except for some door knocking. But again, how you recruited people was virtual. But you also think about if you think about your kind of peer-to-peer campaign, it doesn't just end at the event. Like there's all that stuff leading up to it. So here, yes, there was election day, but there was 3 weeks of early voting and absentee voting. So the interesting thing about that is all of this was happening when people were essentially having their event on their own time. So think about and what happened was if they had their own events, so again, I voted early, it didn't mean that I was still not being asked to then give more after my event. So if you think about what your campaign is, there's a lot of like, oh, everybody's going to do this on the same day. I think we've already seen some organizations are moving to like, do it on your own time. You have to be prepared for the fact that everybody's going to be on a little bit different schedule. And again, once they complete that activity or go to that virtual thing, it doesn't mean it's over. So,
do you see an analogy of, so election day was event day. In other words,
yep.
Were fundraising before event day as they voting before event day as they do in our world. Do you think we have the opportunity to create something like the excitement around the count on event day, on election day?
Yeah, I think so. It was interesting though, because so many people voted, more people actually in Georgia voted early than on event day. So for a lot of people, their quote unquote work was already done. So we see that, I see that in a lot of kind of, DIY, DIY and peer-to-peer campaigns are becoming a little bit morphed. So it's understanding that people's kind of DIY, they might walk their 5K or bike their thing on their own time. I think that how you build that on the end is talking about your results. And then how do you connect people with each other on that day? So if, as the day is when you're going to announce your results, is it going to be a part of what you're going to do with that money? How do you build and build and build? And again, how do you continue to ask people even after, if somebody's going to do their DIY 5K and they did theirs 6 weeks before, what are you doing to continue to involve them up through that day? Or have you already said, oh no, they've already, they've raised their fundraising minimum and they've already biked their 50 miles. We can see it on our app. Therefore, we've thanked them and they're done.
Right.
So, it's continuing to engage people through that time and creating a community. People want to come together.
Yeah, I think the community is the big deal. All right, so I said it was going to be lots of discussion. We got 6 minutes left. I think I've hit all the questions. I think we're good. This was good. It would be interesting to just simply write a peer-to-peer plan that followed this exactly. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that, the thing to keep in mind is how no one organization did this alone. So this would be my only other thing that I would think about is in this pandemic era, when things are crazy and nonprofits are sometimes struggling, the one thing that we can learn from here too is that you're not in it alone. So this is also a really great time to look at what your organization is doing. Is there somebody who does a similar program? Is there somebody who does a similar mission? And think about how you can collaborate on things, because all of that stuff to get me engaged, I volunteered with four different organizations who all reached out to me separately. It was, so I think that what the pandemic can show us and what this movement can show us is that grassroots is not just like my organization with my people. We've got to be a little bit more creative and collaborative than we ever have been before.
So mission centric instead of organization centric.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like. All right.
Yep.
Girl, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Super fun.
Everyone, thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, you can respond to the email that we'll send you with a recap and the recording, and we will see you next time. Tthanks so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone.